By the time the westbound Orphan train pulled out of Dodge City, there was only one child left on the platform, and he was standing so still beneath the coal smoke a man might have mistaken him for luggage if not for the way his hand kept tightening around the frayed handle of a little brown case. Gideon Cross saw him because the bay mare in the freight yard chose that exact moment to rear, wild-eyed and snorting at the whistle. Two railmen swore and yanked the reins harder, which only made her worse. Gideon stepped in without raising his voice. He laid one broad hand against the mare's neck, found the place just ahead of her shoulder where fear turned to trembling instead of fight, and waited. The mare came down, blowing hot breath into the chill afternoon. The men kept cursing anyway. Gideon never looked at them. He was looking past the mare, past the smoke and the departing train, at the lone boy with the paper tag pinned crooked to his coat. The tag read, Eli Mercer, age 11. A church lady in a plum hat was speaking too brightly, the way folks did when they meant to cover something ugly with sugar. Now, son, you'll come along to Mrs. Doer's boarding house till we sort the matter. The boy did not answer. He was thin in that city way that came from too many winters and not enough meat, but there was nothing wilted about him. His chin was lifted. His boots were split near the toes. Dust rode the hem of his coat, and one sleeve had been let down and re-sewn with blue thread that did not match. He looked past the lady, past the depot, straight into the empty prairie as if he had already learned the hardest part of being left behind was not making a sound when it happened. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight, and if you feel like it, tell us in the comments where you're listening from. A porch in Oklahoma, a kitchen in Alberta, a little town in Wales, a farmhouse in Victoria. It does a body good to know who's riding along. The platform began to clear. Families who had come to choose children were climbing into wagons 2 by 2, clutching the smaller ones, satisfied with their bargains or ashamed of them. A blonde girl in a green ribbon was crying into the shoulder of a woman who would now be called her mother. An older boy with red ears stared hard at the ground beside a farmer's boots. Nobody was looking at Eli Mercer. Nobody except Gideon. He led the bay mare back to the railmen and took his hat from the wagon seat. He might have left then. He had salt blocks to load, a broken north fence, and 26 heifers that did not care one way or another what happened in town. Instead, he crossed the platform with the slow, unhurried stride of a man who never moved fast unless there was blood in the dust. "Why's he here alone?" he asked. It was more words than most folks in Ford County heard from Gideon Cross in a week. The church lady turned, relieved to speak to someone who looked respectable from a distance. "Placement committee did its best, Mr. Cross. Some children find a home directly. Some must wait for proper arrangements." Gideon's gaze shifted to the boy's face. "He got kin. No one fit to keep him," said another voice. Silas Borden came out of the depot office, buttoning one cuff, smooth as fresh lamp oil. He wore a black town coat despite the dust, and had a silver watch chain across his vest that caught the weak sun when he moved. County commissioner, cattle buyer, lender when it suited him, and a man whose smile never seemed to reach the part of him doing the thinking. "He'll be provided for," Borden said. "County law allows apprenticeships for unplaced minors. A ranch east of Crooked Creek needs a stable boy. Roof over his head, food in his belly, work to straighten him out." The church lady's bright voice faltered. "Mr. Borden has kindly offered to see to the paperwork." Gideon looked at Eli. "That true, son?" Still nothing. But the boy's fingers went white around the little case handle. Borden noticed it too. The child doesn't speak much. Didn't answer proper questions. Folks were uncertain. Can't blame them. A household needs usefulness. At that, the boy moved at last. Not backward. Not toward the boarding house lady. He bent, set his case down, and picked up the wool cap that had blown from the head of a smaller orphan girl climbing into a wagon. He brushed the dust off with careful hands, then jogged after the wagon and held the cap up to her. The girl snatched it, sniffling. Eli tipped his head once and came back without waiting to be thanked. Gideon's jaw tightened. Action told him what the boy was too proud or too frightened to say. A child who had been left could still think first of another one. That kind of thing was either born into a person or hammered into them by sorrow. Gideon knew both kinds. Borden clapped a hand on Eli's shoulder. The boy flinched, not much, but enough. "We'll make a worker out of him," Borden said. The wagon waiting by the curb had iron-rimmed wheels and a driver Gideon knew by sight. a broad man named Tully Rees who broke colts rough and drank mean. Eli saw the wagon, saw Tully, and for the first time something opened in his face. It was not panic. Panic was noisy. This was recognition. Gideon stepped closer. "He know that man?" Borden's smile cooled. "You planning to concern yourself with county business, Cross?" "No," Gideon held Eli's gaze. "Planning to know what I'm looking at." For one bare second the platform went quiet enough to hear the engine taking water down the line. Then Borden's hand tightened on the boy. "You're looking at a child no family wanted and a county willing to see he earns his bread." Gideon could have pushed farther. Men had. Men with wives who wanted children, or with towns standing enough to quarrel in daylight. But Gideon Cross lived alone on a hard spread south of the Arkansas, and the town had long ago decided silence made a poor foundation for argument. He looked once more at Eli's face. The boy did not plead. He did not reach. He only stood there with that same terrible stillness, as if he already knew help that had to be begged for rarely came clean. Borden turned him toward the wagon. Gideon let them go. He loaded the salt blocks himself because the rail men had gone off to smoke. He hitched his buckskin, paid for nails and lamp oil, and rode out of Dodge by the South Road, while evening flattened the town into dark shapes against a copper sky. He did not look back until he reached the rise beyond the cemetery. Even from there he could still see the depot roof. He rode another mile before finding the little brown case in the bed of his wagon, tucked between the salt and the coil of new wire. He stopped so hard the buckskin tossed its head. The latch was broken. Inside were 2 shirts, a primer with 3 missing pages, a tin soldier with one leg bent wrong, and a folded scrap of newspaper wrapped around a slice of hard apple gone brown at the edges. On the flyleaf of the primer, in a child's careful hand, were the words Eli Mercer and, beneath it, Brooklyn. There was one more thing. A pencil drawing of a house. Crooked chimney. 2 windows. Smoke curling up. In front of it stood a man, a woman, and a boy with a dog so large it looked half wolf. The woman's face was only a circle, the man's too, but the dog had careful eyes and the boy's hand was touching its head. Gideon stared at that drawing until the light went thin. Caleb had once drawn houses the same way. His son had died 6 winters ago in a blue norther that came early and hard across open country. The wagon axle had split near Mulberry Creek. Gideon had put his wife and boy beneath blankets, told them to stay put while he rode for help, and lost the trail coming back in the white dark. By dawn his wife still breathed. Caleb did not. 7 years old. One mitten missing. Snow in the lashes. Since then Gideon had used words the way other men used cartridges in a dry year. Only when he could not afford not to. He shut the case. By the time he reached his ranch, the stars were up and the smell of cold sage had come off the flats. He unsaddled by lantern light, scattered grain for the horses, and stood a long while in the doorway of the empty house, listening to the boards settle. On the wall hung Caleb's small scarf, red once, now dulled by years of dust and memory. Gideon took it down. At dawn he rode back to Dodge. Mrs. Doerr's boarding house sat across from the feed store and smelled of coffee, starch, and old grief. Alma Doerr herself opened the door with her sleeves rolled above the elbows and flour on one cheek. She was a widow with a spine like a ramrod and eyes that had no patience for foolish men. "You're early for breakfast, Mr. Cross." "Boy." Gideon held up the little case. "Where is he?" Her face changed. "Only a little." "Enough. Come in." She shut the door behind him and led him to the dining room, where the curtains were still half drawn against the morning. "I kept him here no more than an hour yesterday," she said quietly. "Fed him stew. He thanked me without words." Then Borden arrived with county papers and took him to the Haskell place. Gideon frowned. Tully Rees drives for Haskell now. He drives for whoever pays cash and asks no questions. The Haskell place sat nearly a day's ride east, on a spread of hard grass and broken draws where boys were said to break broncs before they were near grown enough to know what fear could do to bones. Men came back from Haskell's with pay docked and fingers missing. Some did not come back at all. Alma wiped her hands on her apron. There was another child last spring, a Polish boy, left over from an orphan train in Wichita. He was sent there too. What happened? She held Gideon's gaze. He died before winter. Borden called it fever. No one else saw the body. Silence fell between them. Not an empty silence. A heavy one. Then Alma said, You knew that child wasn't right with Borden the minute you saw him. Gideon looked at the case in his hand. I left. She came closer. Then stop leaving. The words landed clean. That was the moment the easy road stood plain before him. He could ride back to his ranch. Mend his fence. Let town law be town law. Haskell's was not his affair. An 11-year-old city orphan with no blood claim on him was not his affair. The spring calves were his affair. Winter hay was his affair. The heifers that would drift if the fence stayed broken were his affair. And still all he could see was a paper tag pinned crooked to a thin coat, and a boy learning how to make no sound when the world put him aside. Sheriff Cobb caught him at the hitch rail outside. Big man. Pale mustache. Hands that seemed embarrassed to rest near the gun he wore. Alma tell you more than she ought? Cobb asked. Gideon tied the case to his saddle. Boys scared of Borden. Boys scared of everything. City trash gets frightened easy. Cobb lowered his voice. Let this alone, Cross. County apprenticeship's legal. Haskell ain't. Cobb's eyes flicked away. Ain't your business either. Gideon mounted. Cross, the sheriff said sharply. You ride out there and stir dust. Borden will make trouble. For you, not him. Gideon settled the red scarf inside his coat pocket, close to his chest. Then I reckon dust's getting stirred. He rode east under a whitening sun, the little case bumping against his stirrup leather. North meadowlarks flashed up from the roadside grass. Twice he dismounted to read sign where the road split. Tully's wagon had a cracked right wheel band that bit a crescent shape into soft places. 2 saddle horses rode with it. One pigeon-toed, one dragging slightly on the left hind. Gideon read the trail the way some men read scripture. Slow, exact, without vanity. Near noon he found the first proof he was not too late. A coat button lay in the wheel ruts beside a cottonwood draw, black and plain, and snapped clean from its thread. Gideon picked it up, rubbed the dust free, and slid it into his pocket. Toward evening he saw Haskell's south line fence and the windmill beyond it, turning with a squeak like an old hinge. The bunkhouse smoke rose straight. No storm coming. Worse in some ways. Clear weather let men hunt longer. He tethered the buckskin in a dry wash and bellied up the slope on his forearms, careful of loose stone. Below him the yard spread mean and bare. Corrals, a low house, a tack shed, and 3 boys carrying water buckets too heavy for them. One of them was Eli Mercer. The boy moved stiffly. There was a bruise starting beneath one eye. Gideon felt something old and ugly uncoil inside him. From the house porch, Silas Borden's voice drifted across the yard. Haskell wants labor, not charity. The smaller ones can go to the livery in town. This 1 inch, and he nodded toward Eli, stays. Quiet ones last longer. Haskell spat into the dust. Kid won't answer. Then beat answers into him, or teach him not to need them. Eli's bucket sloshed. He did not look up. Gideon lay there as the light died and the temperature dropped out of the ground. He could leave now and ride for a judge in town, though by the time law came, the boy might be in Texas or dead or both. He could wait till deepest dark and take his chance alone. He could do what he had done once before. Tell himself he would come back in time. He would not do that again. If you were in Gideon's place right there, with the law bent against you and a child you barely knew standing in a stranger's yard, what would you have done? Would you have turned for home and safety, or ridden into trouble for someone nobody else had chosen? Gideon waited until the bunkhouse lamp went low and the men's laughter turned drunk and careless. Then he slid down the far side of the wash, crossed behind the corrals, and reached the tack shed with the night wrapped tight around him. The door was barred from outside. He lifted the latch slow and slipped in. Eli jerked awake from a pile of feed sacks, one hand flying up as if to ward off a blow. Moonlight slanted through the wall cracks and laid pale stripes across his face. Gideon crouched. It's me. The boy stared. Depot. Gideon touched 2 fingers to his own hat brim, the smallest reminder he could offer. Come on. Eli looked past him toward the door, suspicious and bright-eyed as a trapped colt. Gideon held out the brown case. The boy's breath caught. He took it fast, pressing it to his chest. That should have been enough. It was not. The moment they stepped into the yard, a hound barked. Then another. A lamp flared in the bunkhouse window. Go, Gideon said. They ran. Boots pounded the porch. Men shouted. Eli was fast, faster than Gideon expected, slipping through shadow and fence gap like he had been planning escape every hour since he arrived. A horse screamed in the corral when a shot cracked. Gideon cut the rope on the nearest saddled gelding, slapped it toward Eli, and caught the boy under the ribs when he missed the stirrup the first time. Another shot. Wood splintered beside his head. Then Eli spoke. Wire. One raw word, torn out of him. Gideon dropped flat as a snare line whipped through the dark at neck height between two posts. It would have taken him clean from the saddle. Eli had seen it first. They hit the wash at a dead run, one horse between them, Gideon half dragging the boy up behind him, dogs howling now, men cursing, Haskell bellowing to cut them off at the creek. The gelding stumbled in the wash bottom. Gideon turned him by feel. No wasted motion. No wasted breath. Shots again. One clipped his hat brim. One hit the horse's rump, and the animal lunged forward so hard Eli nearly flew free. They burst out onto open prairie with the moon bright as tin overhead. Ride. Just ride. Hooves hammered the hardpan. Cold air sliced Gideon's throat. Eli's hands were locked fist deep in his coat. Behind them came 3 riders, maybe 4. Haskell knew the country. So did Gideon. He cut south where the ground broke into shallow arroyos and bunchgrass hummocks that looked flat by moonlight and were not. A town man would hesitate there. Haskell did not. But Haskell's horses were bigger, heavier, used to chasing cattle, not threading ravines in the dark. One rider went down behind them with a curse and a burst of loose stone. They reached Mule Knife Creek near midnight. Only a black seam in the prairie until the gelding nearly went over its bank. Gideon hauled left, found the cattle crossing by memory, and pushed the horse straight through the shallows. Water slapped icy against his boots. On the far bank, Eli twisted and shouted into his ear, voice ragged from disuse. Office. Book. Gideon did not understand. What? The boy swallowed hard. His book. Borden's. Names. He had seen it. Remembered it. Even now, terrified and freezing and hanging on for dear life, he was thinking beyond escape. What names? Boys. That changed everything. Borden wasn't just hiding one cruel arrangement. He was keeping account. A shot rang out. Fire tore across Gideon's side, hot and blunt at once. He grunted, nearly losing the reins. Eli grabbed them before they could fall. Small hands. Steady. Left, the boy whispered. There's a shack. Gideon stared at him. You know? Eli's teeth chattered. Saw it coming in. They found the shack, a sheep herder's line place half sunken into the bank, roof sagging, one shutter missing. Gideon got off the horse and almost went to a knee. Eli slid down, shoved shoulder first under Gideon's arm, and together they stumbled inside. The room smelled of old ashes and mice. Gideon barred the door with a broken chair and finally let himself look at the blood soaking his shirt. A graze. Deep enough to hurt, not deep enough to kill, provided Haskell's men didn't set the place alight first. Hoofbeats circled outside. Come on out, Cross. Haskell shouted. You're stealing county property now. Gideon's hand found the revolver at his belt. 2 rounds left. Eli stood by the wall, chest sawing, little brown case still clenched in one hand, as if he could not trust the world with it a second time. Can you talk? Gideon asked. The boy gave a crooked, almost angry shrug. Some. Why didn't you? Eli looked at the floorboards. Every time I did, folks heard what they wanted. Slow. Stupid. Liar. Ungrateful. His voice was rusty, but each word came cleaner than the last. Quiet was safer. Outside, someone laughed. Then came the sharp smell of kerosene. Gideon went still. A bottle hit the roof. Flame hissed, then caught in the dry shingles with a hungry crackle. Movement froze. Breath shortened. Fire took the night. Eli's face flashed orange in the wall light. There's a cellar, he said. Trapdoor. I seen it. He dropped to his knees, felt along the warped floorboards, and found the iron ring beneath a pile of old sacks just as a second bottle smashed through the broken shutter. Smoke rolled low. Gideon hauled the trap up. Black earth yawned beneath them. They climbed down into damp, cold darkness while the shack burned overhead and boots thudded past on the floor they had just left. For a long while there was nothing but fire, smoke sifting through cracks, and the sound of both of them trying not to breathe too hard. At some point, Eli reached across the dark and pressed the little brown case into Gideon's lap. Gideon frowned. What for? So you know I ain't running. It was a child's promise and a grown man's all at once. The fire moved off with the wind before dawn. Haskell's men, sure they had smoked them out or cooked them in, rode north cursing toward the creek. Gideon and Eli did not move until the last hoofbeat faded. When they crawled from the cellar, the shack was a charred skeleton against a pearl gray morning. Cold bit at the sweat on Gideon's neck. His wound had stiffened. Eli tore one of his own shirts into strips and cleaned it with water from the horse trough behind the ruins. Joss sat, hands shaking only a little. "Who taught you that?" Gideon asked. "My ma sewed in a place where needles slipped. She patched what got cut." Eli tied the bandage as neat as any ranch wife. Said cloth and skin both hold better if you pull the knot honest. Gideon sat against the blackened wall and watched the boy work. 11 years old. Left in New York, carried west among strangers, rejected in a church basement, sold like a tool, beaten by men, and still careful with knots. "What happened to your ma?" Eli kept his eyes on the bandage. "Factory fire. 2 winters back." He swallowed. "Then an aunt kept me till her boarders complained. Then a mission house. Then the train." He sat back on his heels. "Folks look at you different when there ain't anybody coming to claim you." Gideon knew that look. He had worn a version of it himself since the day he buried his boy and his wife left for her sister's place in Abilene. Unable to share a house with all the empty, Gideon dragged him behind him. He took the red scarf from inside his coat pocket. Eli's gaze lifted. "My sons," Gideon said. His voice scraped on the words. "Caleb." He had not spoken the name aloud in months. Maybe a year. It opened something sharp in him, but not deadly. "Not this time. He died waiting on me." Gideon folded the scarf once, careful with the frayed edge. "Since then, I got pour it coming when I should. Pour it near everything that matters." Eli looked at the scarf, then at him. The morning was so still Gideon could hear frost thawing off the burnt roof beam. Finally the boy said, very quiet, "Folks leave loud. Staying's the quiet part." Gideon let that settle. It was the truest thing he had heard in years. He wrapped the red scarf once around Eli's throat against the cold. The boy touched it with his fingertips, but did not pull away. If this part of the story is finding you where you live, the narrator might say softly by the fire, then you're exactly who it was meant for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep telling them. And then, because the best stories do not linger too long on their own tenderness, the morning kept moving. They could have ridden south for Gideon's ranch and hidden there. Haskell might have let it go to avoid questions. Borden would not. Men like Silas Borden did not stop when they could still call harm by another name. If Eli went to ground, Borden could say the boy had run, that Gideon had stolen him, that county law was being thwarted by a half-mad rancher with blood on his shirt. So Gideon made the harder choice again. "We go back," he said. Eli blinked. "To town." "To finish it." The boy considered that with the solemnity children get when life has asked too much of them too early. Then he nodded. "He keeps the ledger in his office. Top drawer under the papers." "You saw that?" "I saw near everything." Eli's mouth twitched without becoming a smile. "Quiet helps." They rode for Dodge under a clear noon sky, sharing the horse when Gideon's wound pulled too hard. At a siding station 10 miles out, Gideon stopped long enough to use the telegraph key in the freight office. He did not know messages well, but the operator did, and Gideon paid cash to send one to the Children's Aid office in Wichita and another to Judge Holloway in Dodge. County apprenticeship, fraud stop, child in danger stop, have witness stop, come courthouse today. By the time they reached town, the Monday stock auction had filled Front Street with wagons, riders, and dust. Borden stood on the courthouse steps in his black coat, speaking with 2 cattlemen and smiling as if the world had always arranged itself to suit him. Then Gideon Cross rode straight into the crowd with a soot-streaked boy in a red scarf behind him, and the whole town turned to look. Borden's smile held for 1 second too long. Then it cracked. "Well now," he called. "Sheriff, here's our thief." Cobb came forward, hand on his belt. "Cross." Gideon swung down from the saddle. Pain lanced his side. He ignored it. Eli slid down after him. Chin up, thin as a fence rail, and twice as steady. "That boy is under county contract," Borden said loudly. "This man broke into private property, assaulted lawful employers, and abducted." "No," Gideon said. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. Folks fell quiet because Gideon Cross simply did not speak unless the earth itself had something at stake. He took a ledger from the saddlebag. Burn marks, black in one corner. Eli had found it in the shack cellar, tucked inside the little brown case, while Gideon fought smoke and blood. "Smart child." Quiet child, watching everything. Borden's face drained. Gideon held the book up where the crowd could see. Names of boys. Payments. Places sent. Borden laughed, but there was iron fear underneath it now. A ranch hand's account book means nothing. Eli stepped forward before Gideon could stop him. His voice shook once, then steadied. Page 13. Janos Varga. Sent from Wichita. $40 paid. Marked sick 3 weeks later. He swallowed. Page 17. Tomas Reed. Age 9. Sent to livery. $22. Page 21. Me. Murmurs moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Alma Dore came out of the boarding house, flowers still on her sleeves. I saw the boy taken from my care under promise of proper lodging. No one said anything about sale. Nestor Pike the blacksmith, who missed nothing from his forge door, called out. I seen Tully hauling 3 boys east in that wagon all summer. Thought it strange then. Borden's eyes darted to Sheriff Cobb. Arrest them both. Now. Cobb did not move. Gideon opened the ledger. Interest notes too. He turned to a page Borden had likely never imagined anyone with dirt under his nails could read well enough to use against him. Payments from county funds. Same dates as cattle commissions. Double took. A rancher in the back muttered, That's embezzling. Another said, That's children. Borden came down the steps fast then, no smoothness left. Give me that book. Gideon stood his ground. What happened next took less than 3 seconds and told the whole truth of Silas Borden better than any sermon could have. He reached inside his coat, not for a paper, but for a gun. He aimed past Gideon. At Eli. The crowd shouted. Alma screamed. Sheriff Cobb lunged too late. Gideon moved on instinct born of years with frightened horses and bad ground. He caught Borden's wrist, turned with the force of it, and drove his shoulder through the man's chest. The gun went off into the sky. A flock of pigeons burst from the courthouse roof in a thunder of wings. Borden hit the steps hard. Gideon kicked the pistol away. Then, in front of every man and woman in Dodge, Eli Mercer picked up the ledger from the dust, hugged it to his chest, and did not flinch. That was the end of Silas Borden, though the law took another few hours to put proper words around it. Judge Holloway arrived before sundown. So did a rail agent carrying the telegraph reply from Wichita, confirming the Children's Aid Society had never authorized county sale of leftover children into labor contracts. Haskell was fetched in irons by deputies from the next county, who were less obliged to Borden than Cobb had been. Tully Rees tried to ride out and was caught at the river crossing. By dark, the courthouse office had yielded more papers: mortgage fraud, falsified accounts, names of boys no one in town had known to look for. Borden lost his commission seat, his stock contracts, his standing, and by winter he lost his land besides. The Haskell place was sold to settle claims. Money from the seized accounts went first to the county's owed, then to the aid society handling the children Borden had trafficked like livestock. It was not enough to give back what had been taken, but it was enough to ensure no one in Dodge ever again spoke of his fall as bad luck. They called it what it was: justice. As for Gideon, when Judge Holloway asked before witnesses whether he intended to keep custody of Eli Mercer until proper arrangements could be made, he did not look at the floor or the sky or the empty place inside himself where fear used to give orders. He looked at the boy. If he'll have it, Gideon said. Every person in that room turned then to Eli. The child in the red scarf drew a breath. He had been chosen last by the world and worst. He had been measured by usefulness, by silence, by how little trouble he might cause. Yet now, with dust on his boots and soot in the creases of his hands, he understood perhaps for the first time that a question could be asked without a trap hidden inside it. He crossed the room and stood beside Gideon. I would, he said. The practical matters took time. A bed had to be made ready in Gideon's spare room, which still held boxes no one had opened since his wife left. Alma Dore sent curtains and 3 jars of peach preserves. Nestor Pike mended Eli's boots and refused payment. Sheriff Cobb, red-faced and quieter than usual, wrote out a week later with an apology that Gideon did not answer, but did not refuse either. The town's attitude changed in the plain, useful ways that mattered. Men tipped hats to Eli. Women asked if he took sugar in his coffee. Children no longer stared at the boy from the train. They waved when he came in beside Gideon for nails or molasses. And when someone once referred to him as that orphan, Almador corrected them so sharply the fellow near dropped his sack of flour. By first frost the ranch had a second saddle on the porch rail and a school primer on the kitchen table with all its torn pages carefully mended. Gideon still spoke less than most men. Eli still fell quiet when strangers crowded him. Healing rarely arrived all at once. But the house no longer sounded empty when the wind moved through it. There was a pan left drying by the sink. A boy's laugh, rusty but real, sometimes carried from the corral when a colt did something foolish. And more than once, late in the evening, Gideon found himself answering a question with more than one word because there was finally someone in the room worth staying for. By spring, when the creek ran full and the cottonwoods showed their first green, Eli painted a new sign for the gate in careful block letters. He asked before hammering it up. Cross Ranch, it said. Then below that, in smaller hand, home. Years later folks would say the change in Gideon Cross began the day he rode to bring a left-behind boy back from bad men. They would not be wrong. But the truest part was smaller than that. It happened every evening after, when a lamp was lit in the front window before dark, and one scarred man and one once silent child learned together that home was not the land under your boots so much as the place that kept a light burning until you came through the night. And in the long gold hush of one late summer dusk, the boy rode the fence line bareheaded while Gideon stood on the porch below the cottonwoods, and the lamp behind him glowed warm against the gathering blue. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf seamstress sent west to marry a farmer who never asked for a wife at all. And the winter night, she heard danger before any hearing man in the valley did.